My name is Dana Keefe. I work at Career Ed. Most of you probably haven't met me because I mostly work with alums. In case you all don't know, you can talk to me about interviewing pretty much for the rest of your life, as long as I'm still there, but you'll probably be there. Anyway. Okay, so I also sometimes work with students when we are missing people or we have people who have left, and so I work with students and alums. And quite honestly, interviewing is probably my favorite thing to talk to people about. The reason is because a little bang gives you a lot of buck. So a little goes a long way. Even just a little bit of preparation can really make a difference in your confidence, in your presentation. And so, if you don't have a chance to do a ton of prep, then, just feel good about the fact that a little bit is even going to help you. Are any of you even in an interview process right now? You are? Okay, great. Anybody done any negotiating lately? Not so much? Okay. All right. I'd like to start by asking, does anyone have a favorite interview question that they'd like to be asked?
Tell me about yourself.
Tell me about yourself, okay. Great. Any others? Which one?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, that could be the same answer because sometimes when I ask people what is the least favorite question you want to get asked, I hear also tell me about yourself. So aside from that one, are there any other least favorites out there? Yes.
What are your strengths and weaknesses?
Great. Yep.
When's the time that you had a problem with a customer and how did you solve it?
Okay.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Great. Horrible question. But what else? There weren't any more?
Oh, if you don't seem to have experience with X, tell me why.
That's just a comforting, encouraging question, isn't it? Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go over some of the main groups of questions, and I realize that maybe with one exception, none of you are really, in an interview process right now. So just try to absorb it, take it in, keep it in the back of your head until you get to that point. And don't worry that you're, have to get it all right now or write everything down or whatever, because it isn't. I think this is my hope is that this is this session gets, thought-provoking and gets you thinking so that then when the time comes that you're actually doing an interview, you'll have some place to start, okay? All right, so first thing to say is if you go into an interview entirely cold, I've heard a lot of those stories and they don't usually end well. Mostly it's a bad idea because if the first time these sentences are coming out of your mouth is in the interview, you're probably not going to love what you're hearing. And also you might have missed seeing something or making a connection that you would have known if you'd done some research. So, 3 things. You do have to research the place that you're working. You better read that website inside and out. You better read what other people are saying about that company or that hospital or that university or that organization or that nonprofit, whatever it is. And you also want to research the people that you're going to meet with, because you might discover that you both volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, or you might discover that you both went to the same high school or something like that. So it's great to make sure that you do that kind of research for the people that you're going to meet. And maybe you don't always know all of them, especially in a Zoom interview. Sometimes they'll throw in extra people, and so you can only do what you can do there. But it's helpful to do that and be ready with. It might also help you understand what questions to ask each person if you were going to have, say, 3 interviews in a day, 3 successive interviews. Okay. You also, of course, have to think about what you're going to bring, because you're going to be asked that. Your experience is one thing, your skills are another thing, and those can overlap, but they also can be different. So maybe you, were in a lot of drama productions. Those are experiences that have a lot to do with teamwork and working hard and understanding other people, but they also give you skills like public speaking and acting. Maybe the same for athletics. Maybe if you grew up in a different country, that gives you a different experience that you would bring at this organization or to your team. So that's it's important to be reflecting on those things and jotting down some key things that you don't want to forget. And if you only remember one thing today, please remember to practice out loud. A lot of people just practice in their head. They'll review lists of questions. They'll think about it on a run. They'll be thinking, here's how I would answer that question. But I promise you, when it first comes out of your mouth, it's not the answer that you want. So you want that first few times to either be talking into your phone and recording it, or looking into the mirror, or doing a mock interview with somebody at Career Ed. Mock interviews are the best because even though they're artificial, they actually put you under a teeny bit of pressure. And you have this sense like, ooh, I don't really know how to answer that. So it's really a great idea. But if you aren't even doing a mock interview or you're not doing one yet, try some of your answers out loud. Okay, so we're going to get right to the questions. And these are actually, I have been doing interview training for a long time, and many of the questions can fit into these 5 groups. Now I will say, like your question does not, and no one is sure what you're going to be asked because everyone who's interviewing you is an individual, and they may have like favorite things that they like to ask. They may have a really left field question that someone asked them that they just want to try out. They all may have agreed as a group what are the questions we're going to ask all the candidates. So you don't really know, but here's a good place to get started, and we'll talk about the other ones too. Okay, the opening questions are, tell me about yourself. Let us know what brings you here to this interview, or walk me through your resume, things like that. Most all commonly tell me about yourself. And the reason why this is hard, I think, is because everyone thinks, oh, I don't have to practice that. I know me, that's not going to be hard. And then I'll hear things like, well, I went to kindergarten in Ohio, and then, and I'm like, ooh, wow. Definitely we need a little structure, we need a little, some guideposts along the way, and you want to aim for about 2 minutes with this one. That's the only time I'm going to tell you a time. But because this question can be very broad and open-ended, I think it's helpful to have like 2 plus a little minute thing to shoot for. Otherwise, people are just giving way too much detail. Along the way, you want to be talking about the transitions or decisions that you made. Like, I chose to go to Wellesley because I thought I was going to major in this, but I ended up having a great class and I chose to major in that. So decisions, transitions, and also the third word is the evolution of your interest. I mean, if you're applying for a finance job and in 5th grade, you decided to be the treasurer of the 5th grade dog sitting club, well, you go way back maybe. But some people's decisions have had more evolution, and it started with one thing and then they had an internship experience or a volunteer experience or a conversation or a class that led them to shift a little bit. So that's another way to help tell your story. And when you end that question, you should be ending with something that's saying, so when I saw this particular job opening, I was excited because it seems to bring together my enthusiasm about X and the background and skills that I've developed doing Y. So you want to end your long description with why you're excited to be talking to that person. Okay, any questions on that one? We'll do more questions at the end, but okay. The 4 why questions are, why this field, why this company or organization, why this role, and why now. Okay, if you're a senior graduating, why now is pretty obvious. I wouldn't stress out about that one, it's because you're graduating. But the other ones, you're probably going to be asked at least 1, if not 2 of those. And you really want to have more than one reason. I've heard people answer, why this field? Why are you interested in marketing? Because I'm interested in how people think. Great, but that's not really enough. If you're really excited about a field, you probably have 3 reasons there. So think about 2 to 3 reasons, maybe even 3, for all those why questions, or at least why this field and why this company. If you can't think of more than one about why the company, you might need to go do a little more research. And those are very important because a lot of people focus on explaining, they're so nervous, like I have to show them that I can do the job. They also want to know why you want to do the job. And if they interview 10 people who could all accomplish the tasks necessary in the job, they're going to pick the one who's the most excited about it, right? So it's really both things that you want to be communicating. Okay, weaknesses, mistakes, and failures. These are everybody, the bane of everybody's existence. And frankly, I don't even think they're good. Well, I don't think weakness is a good question anymore, because I truly believe that weaknesses and strengths are often flip sides of the same coin. And I might have a characteristic that's really a strength in some settings and more of a weakness in others. And if I were to answer that question, I would start by saying sometimes strengths and weaknesses can be flip sides of the same coin. You can tell about your weakness and also maybe mention an area where sometimes it's helpful. But I think a lot of people ask the questions because they're on a lot of like old school lists of interview questions. And so sometimes they will pop up. There was a famous story of, in Boston, one of the gubernatorial candidates was asked, what are your strengths and weaknesses, by a reporter, and so he told about his strengths, and then she said, and what about weaknesses? And he said, I'm not going to tell you about my weaknesses, you can figure those out for yourself. And he lost the election, and many people pointed to that exact interview because he wouldn't come up with something. So anyway, that was an interesting one. So weakness is something that's allegedly still with you. Is it bothering you if I'm moving back and forth? You're okay? You're good? Okay. I just know if I should try to stay still more. I'm moving a little. A weakness is something that's still with you, but mistakes and failures are over. So the approach is similar, but there's a slight difference, okay? I'm going to say mistake and a failure first. You want to think of an experience where something did not go the way you planned. It's not, you probably can't say, well, you know, we were giving a presentation, but our materials didn't arrive on time because there was a blizzard. I mean, the blizzard is not anything you could control. So it's not like a natural disaster isn't really a mistake or a failure because it's not really your fault. It has to be something where you might have done something different to make something better. But you want to say something like, okay, so first of all, here's what I'll often hear. So the team was working on this project and it got delayed because one of our team members didn't really know how to use the software and was nervous about asking for help. So we plowed through, and at the end we realized that she had not used the software correctly, or I had not used the software correctly, and so that was a terrible mistake, period. And then you have that word mistake like hanging in the airspace. You don't want that to be the last thing that's in between you and the interviewer. Sometimes I'll hear, so the project was delayed and it was a terrible mistake, but I learned a lot. But what? You can't just say I learned a lot, okay? So you want to end by, you want to describe it very briefly. Let this not be your longest description, just enough so that your listener knows what the story is. And so the project got delayed, but what I learned from that experience was that I need to check in with everybody on the team a little bit in advance, weekly. So I've implemented some patterns that when I take on a new project, I check with everybody. We set a schedule for check-ins to make sure that everybody's comfortable with what they're doing, and that's been working better. So you really want to give a specific example of what you've done because you had that one experience that didn't go well, okay? And the weakness one is similar. It's like, because I know this about myself, like for example, I would say I'm a very big picture thinker, and sometimes I can be not that detail oriented. So because I know that about myself, I sometimes try to make it a point to have meetings with people who are much more detail oriented than I am. And sometimes I set myself specific times to set aside to look at the work that I'm doing and make sure I'm not missing a detail. And with both of those things, that's helping me strengthen my detail orientation and making sure that I don't miss anything. And it's something I'm continuing to work on, but I'm feeling pretty good about the direction it's headed. Okay? So you're not saying like the classic weakness ones are, oh, I'm too much of a perfectionist, or oh, I work too hard. But you're saying something that's true, something that you're working on, but you're saying the fact that you know it about yourself is helpful, and you can then take steps to make sure that it's not a problem. Okay? All right. Everybody familiar with the TV show Jeopardy? Okay. So with the tell me about a time when questions, I really think that I'm just checking the time here. I just want to make sure I'm 7:30. Okay. So this could be, tell me about a time when you showed perseverance. Tell me about a time when you were creative. Tell me a time when you had to think out of the box about solving a problem. Tell me about a time when you and your team, you made a great contribution to a team. So you all aren't old enough to have very many experiences that you're going to choose from to answer these questions. So I take the Jeopardy approach, which is think of maybe 3 to 5 experiences that you've had. It might be a summer job, it might be, lifeguarding, it might be an internship, it might be a club that you're in on campus that you're involved in. And think about, okay, well with that club, I've done a lot of publicity, I've done a lot of, event planning, so I could use this to talk about pivoting under pressure, or working with a team, or remaining calm when things don't go as planned, or checking all the small details before the event happens. And then this other experience I could use to talk about resolving conflict with people, or using my leadership skills. And so instead, you pick the 4 or 5 experiences, and underneath those, you write down what possible kinds of questions you could answer with those, because you're not going to choose from 20 probably. But there might be 20 questions that people could come up with that would, have you ask about a particular situation. Okay? All right, and then for those of you who will, work really hard on your resume for a couple weeks, you'll bring it into Career Ed, and somebody will say, okay, that looks great, here's a couple of suggestions, you go back, you fix them, and then the next thing you know, somebody in the interview is saying, what is not on your resume that you'd like us to know about you? And you say, what do you mean what's not on my resume? I just spent 2 weeks working on it. And so this is a tricky question, and I have heard a lot of people get stumped by it. So my advice on this one is, if you have something major in your life that you'd like to explain, like, terrible grades one semester because you were taking care of someone who was sick, or God forbid someone was in a car accident or something, you could use this for that. But I don't think most of the time people are, so that's an opportunity if you had something like that, but for the most part I think people are looking for just a little more about you. Maybe you have a resume that's filled with a lot of journalism and writing, but you also really like music, and that's been an important part of your life, so you could talk about that a little bit. Maybe you could mention a couple of lighthearted things, like you're really, you love connecting people, and you're always having your friends meet other friends, because that's just something that brings you a lot of joy. Or you have a sense of humor, and you're known for finding humor, and your friends love you for that. Or you're a great movie buff, and they come to you for recommendations. I mean, it doesn't have to be serious, it doesn't have to be work related. It shouldn't be like too weird or personal, or there's a line there. But you can just say something that's a little bit more personal about you, helping them get to know you. Okay, so those are big categories, and your question about why don't you have this particular experience, that could be meant to be checking your poise, really, because it's a bit of a challenging question. And so I think sometimes if somebody's trying to sort of put you on the defensive, one important thing is to remain poised and not try to get flustered by that. I guess we'd have to practice a little bit. I'm not exactly sure why you should have had that practice or have had that skill, but you might say, well, I devoted time to doing these 3 things when I was a senior, and that is something that I've had in my head, and that is something I'd like to get better at, and I'm considering taking an online course, or I'd love to get up to speed on that quickly if I need to, or something like that. But not to get overly defensive about it, I guess, would be a warning there. Any other if you're asked a question that you absolutely don't know the answer to, but you should for some reason, I mean, you can't make it up. So if it's a fact, like the thing you're missing is a fact that you should know about the company or something, you can, if I were asked something like that, I would say, I don't know the answer, but you can be sure that as soon as I walk out of this interview, I'm gonna figure it out. Because I don't know what else you could really say there. That's kind of tricky. You can't make up something that you don't know. And then there are also some kind of, like, some people get worried about these questions, like if you could go to dinner with someone from history, who would you choose? If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Things like that. You really can't prepare for those. So, but just remember that you could take, 5 or 10 seconds and say, oh, fun question, let me think about that for a minute. Okay? Any other random questions about questions? Yes?
This is kind of going back to something you had talked about, but you were talking about the, what was it? The tell me about yourself question, and you said it to shoot around 2 minutes. I feel like I always have the issue where I don't know, I don't have a long answer at all. So should we try to shoot for that, or is it okay to be significantly shorter?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, well, the thing is, I do find sometimes that people are nervous about going too long, so then they go too short, and they didn't give the person enough to go on to maybe ask a follow-up question. So I think if you talk about why you chose to go to Wellesley, at Wellesley, I was involved in these couple of areas, so there should be a couple of things to give the interviewer something to go on, I guess. You want to help make it easy for them too. So, I mean, if it's 1.5 minutes, I think that's okay. If it's 30 seconds, it's probably not enough. And again, that's a weird one because I'm not normally worried about timing. But is that helpful? Okay. Yes.
At the end of interviews, often you're asked, do you have any other questions? Is there some type of something that we should be asking, or what if you don't have a question?
Right. Okay. Yes. A lot of people, as you just described, are worried that there's some sort of strategic question that you should be asking. I always say, in all honesty, start with curiosity. What question would you like to know the answer to? What are you curious about? Now you have to, you can't necessarily just go on that, because if you're really curious about vacation time, I would never have that be my first question, right? What is that? What impression does that give? And by the way, how much vacation time do I get? You should want to ask that. But really start thinking, what do I need to know to see if this is a good fit for me? What do I want to ask the person? So sometimes I think of the questions in different categories, like my daily life if I were to have this job. Those questions might be, the person in this role, with whom do they work on a daily basis? Or with whom do they interact? Or outside of this company, who else would this person be working with, in partnership with, or something? Might be, how is work distributed at this company? How are projects determined? How are teams made up? Kind of the nitty-gritty of what your life would be like if you actually had that job. The bigger picture questions might be, the strategy of the company or trends that you're seeing in the field. Those are both big picture kinds of questions. And so, if the company is thinking about expanding geographically or to a different product, or, obviously you're not going to ask that if you're working in a hospital, but, or maybe there was a hospital merger, how is that going to change things? So those are kind of bigger things. It doesn't exactly you at your job, if you got this job, what would you do, right? And then it's really important to ask about, or to find ways to ask the things you're curious about culture. And you may even ask the people for a couple of stories, although you want to be a little careful not to suddenly be tell me about a time when you and your, tell me about a time when everyone had fun at this company, or, something like that. You have to be a little careful, but you can ask, I'd love to hear if you would like to share. I sometimes think it's nice to have a little intro like that. If you'd care to share, I'd love to hear about one of your favorite projects you've worked on. Or I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what it's like working in teams in this company. Or how would you describe the culture? And the one I didn't include on my very minimalist slides is how has COVID changed the work you do? And did you discover anything that has really improved, the way things are, or things that you've decided to really go back to and do them the same way we did them before the pandemic? That can yield some interesting questions. Okay, so you do want to have, a list of 6 or 8 of these questions, because it's possible that people are going to answer some of them when they're talking with you. And then if you only have 2 and they've both been answered, you'll feel frozen. So have several, yeah.
How do you gracefully end this section? Because even in informational interviews, like I ask I'm the one who's coming with all the
Yes.
questions, and then we're both kind of just like looking at each other.
Okay, that's a really, really good question. And I think, especially for people who tend to be a little bit more introverted, I'm an extrovert, but I live with 3 introverts. And I think a long list of questions is really helpful if you tend to be a little bit more interested or introverted, because then you're less likely to run out of questions. However, if you ask for an informational interview, your point is really important, because in an informational interview, you're the one asking the questions. I would keep an eye on the clock. When you ask someone, I would say, are you free to chat on Zoom for 20 or 30 minutes? And if it's around 20 and they've answered all your questions, you could say, wow, this has gone by quickly and you've answered a lot of my questions. I'm so appreciative, thank you. Or if it's getting to be like 25 after, you say, we're approaching 30 minutes and I want to be respectful of your time. I don't have any more burning questions, but is there anything else you'd like to share? So it's usually the time thing is a way to get around that, or is the way to handle that when you're in an informational interview. When you're in a job interview where you're being asked questions, usually they would give you a chance to ask 2, maybe 3, but you might, and then you could also have a sense, I know this interview is supposed to be ending around 11, so I think I'm good for now, and if I had additional questions, would I be able to reach out? That's another thing you could say. Or you could say, thank you all, you've answered a number of my questions, and it's been very helpful and I really appreciate it. So sometimes it is a little bit like taking the steering wheel and just making a statement there, and usually thanking people is a good thing, like thank you so much, these answers have been very helpful, or you've really helped me understand the role better, things like that. Other questions about these questions? Yes?
So could you explain the strategy/trends point again?
Yeah, I think trends are, I'm going backwards here, but trends, let's say you're working in a, even if you're working for a company that creates like Athleta or Lululemon or something like that, like athleisure clothing, is that what it's called? Workout clothes, that's what I call it. So if you're working for a company that's working on workout clothes, probably you're having this conversation that I love to work out, I love to see what people are wearing. What trends are you seeing? As you look to a 5 or 10-year horizon, what trends are you seeing? And I'm curious, is there anything that you can share about what you think is going to become important? So I think that's kind of industry specific. And then strategy is more about like mergers or partnerships, or they just opened up an office in London, what's going to happen with that one, things like that. And you may get clued into those things by reading newspaper articles or blogs or just news about the company, and you could say, I recently read about this. Is there, what does that mean for your company? Is there anything that would be helpful for me to know as I'm applying for this job? That also reminds me, we didn't answer the question about where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years. And that used to be, oh my goodness, when I graduated from college, a very common question. And honestly, I don't know whether everybody feels this way, but I feel like things are changing so quickly that it's a ridiculous question, to be honest, okay? Because you guys, in 5 years, you might be doing a job that isn't even a job right now. So if somebody's really kind of old school and asking you that, then I mean, maybe have something ready. It could be more general, like, you know, I'm excited about this role as a, you know, assisting the investors, but of course I would hope that down the line I would be able to be making more of those investment decisions, or I'm excited to bring my data analysis skills to this work, and I hope that over time I would be able to use them in different sectors or different parts of the company or for different projects, or you want to kind of talk about things that relate to growth or variety, or because what you don't want to say is, oh, I'd like to be doing the exact same thing that I would be doing tomorrow, right? That maybe sounds a little bit like you're not as curious. You don't have to say I would like to take over the world in 5 years, but somewhere, you know, just like talking about growth or curiosity or learning, and you want to feel like you're making a good contribution. So a lot of those good kind of feeling words. And if there are specific things, like I'd like to do those, what are those, you know, the CPA exams and pass all those. That's a goal that I have for the next 5 years, and then use that information. Or, I mean, if you do, or I'd like to learn 3 more computer languages and be able to apply those in this field. You know, there you might have specific things too, which would be perfectly fine. Okay. Okay, so after the interview, especially if you meet with, you know, 3 to 8 people in one day, please jot down some notes. They don't have to be perfect. You can put, you know, met with Sarah, talked about X, you know, because you might need to correspond with each person individually. Sometimes you write individual email thank you notes. Sometimes you write a group one. But you do want to be able to say, what if you come back 2 weeks later and you say, oh, when I was speaking with Elizabeth a couple of weeks ago, she mentioned this. So before you forget, sometimes even like, you know, if you're on the train home or as soon as you get home or whatever, write down what you remember from everything, and then within 24 hours, write a thank you email. If you met with 3 people separately, you should write 3 notes. They can have common elements, but they shouldn't be copies. That looks a little bit lazy maybe. If you were on a Zoom call and there were 10 people, but only a couple of them were asking questions, you could write to the person who organized it, kind of the host, and say, it was wonderful to meet with everyone today on Zoom. That's a more common thing now. So, yes. Any questions about thank you notes? Okay. I have heard, and we have in our own office, when we've been considering candidates, noted that the person didn't write a thank you note. So, I hope that's not a surprise to any of you. Yes?
I mean, if people, like, they're emailing you notes, right? Like, how
Yes.
email.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I said that I should have made a bigger deal of it. Yeah, no, for a while we went through this murky, like, could it be on paper? Could it be emails? I think we're pretty strictly on email now. I mean, I am a huge fan of a handwritten note. I think there's a time and a place for that. And, you know, if you, for example, finish a process and you're going to start a new job, and you know there's been one person who's been extraordinarily helpful, but you've already thanked them after the meeting, it wouldn't be a terrible thing to write them a note. Just say, I'm getting so excited about, you know, starting in 2 weeks. I just wanted to let you know, I just wanted to, you know, really reiterate how helpful and supportive you've been through this process. So yes, but mostly an email one is fine. And it's weird if you do it like 1 hour afterwards, okay? So a little bit of time go by, but within 24 hours. Okay, yes?
In situations where there's like a recruiter or a member of HR who's like organizing your interview, but they're not the person that you're interviewing with, like is it expected or best practice to write them a thank you note as well, or just like the person you're actually interviewing with?
Well, you definitely want to thank the person you're interviewing with for the job. I mean, I think the recruiters, usually they'll call you because they want to know how it went, right?
I mean, not in my experience,
Not-
but this wasn't like consulting or finance.
Okay,
There
yeah.
was like a member of like HR who like said, you're gonna be interviewing with this person,
Okay.
what times work for you?
Yeah.
And like,
I mean, I think it's not a bad idea to write them notes, say, thank you so much for arranging my conversation with so-and-so. It was, very helpful, and she was particularly, helped me understand more about the, blah, blah, blah responsibilities of the role or something. So that's like the secondary one, but I would do them both, if it makes sense. I mean, you have to a little bit use your judgment, but yes.
What about like asking for feedback on how the interview went? Is that appropriate to ask them for thank you note? Like, thank you so much, it was nice to talk to you, do you have any feedback?
I usually feel like people say that until, if you didn't get the job. I mean, it's not, it wouldn't be a terrible thing to say if you have any further questions that you, or if you have any further questions or feedback for me, I would welcome them. I wouldn't just say feedback alone for some reason. That's just my gut feeling talking. I would say question, if you have any additional questions or feedback for me, I would welcome it. I think that's fair. But usually people don't really ask for feedback until they haven't gotten the job.
Right.
And then it's really hard. Surprisingly, a lot of people won't answer, will say, oh, no, you were great. And sometimes they don't really have anything negative to say. It's that there were 3 tremendous candidates, each good in different ways, and they can't say that you were bad. It's just that they had to pick 1 out of 3. But I will also say that it's a very hard thing for some people to do, to give negative feedback if they really have some. So it's hard to get it, but it's always okay to ask if you want to ask. Okay? Yes?
I've heard, sort of going off of that, one of the sort of suggestions I've heard for interview questions is like for on your end, like the interviewee's end at the end, to say something along those lines of feedback, or like, is there anything that I missed, or is there anything that you want to know that, or is there anything that, like, basically, is there anything that I'm faulting on, and give the interviewer that opportunity during it to say that? Like, would you suggest that? Because I hate that. But I don't know if that's it.
Well, I'm kind of with you. It's bold, I would say. I would say on a continuum, I am not the boldest person you'll ever meet. I'm more here. So I have heard that and read it, and I've had people do it. If I were going to do it, I would say something pretty gentle, like, I think out loud, so you just have to let me try it, and then I'll tell you if I like it, okay? See, this is why you need to practice out loud. I would probably say something like, interviews are always a little bit time constrained, and I really appreciated our back and forth here today. Is there anything that I didn't elaborate on that you think would be helpful for you to know? Okay, I liked that. That was all right. That was pretty good. So that's what I would say it like that, rather than like, is there an egregious hole that you think I'm No, you would never do that. Sometimes I think of those very funny, sarcastic things in my head, but I would never say them. But so, I guess that's a little bit gentle to me versus saying, is there a skill or something you think I don't have that you'd like me to address? I mean, I don't know how you would even say that very well. I don't know. So I don't think you have to say that I'm going to do it during every interview, but if you have a line written down that's comfortable for you, you can, copy mine or take it and make it so that it sounds like yours, because, you really do want to be authentic in all of your interviews. You don't want to get a job being someone you're not, because it's going to be really hard to be that person when you get there. But if you make it your own and it's comfortable for you, you practice it a few times, you have that in your head, bless you. And all of a sudden, maybe it sort of feels like, wow, this has been a rushed interview. Maybe this is an appropriate time to ask. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
A little unrelated to this particular line, but how do you let an interviewer know that you have something in common without sounding like stalkery? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I think LinkedIn is fair game. If you noticed on LinkedIn that someone,
Yeah, let's say.
Well, LinkedIn now has like plenty of sections for community service and volunteer work, so that's one that might happen. I would say I have to mention, I noticed on LinkedIn that you and I went to the same high school, and they'll, 100% of it, oh, that's great, whatever. So if you found out in some other way, like it could be, you and I have a mutual acquaintance, and so mentioned that you and I both grew up in Wisconsin, okay, whatever. That would be fine too. But if you're concerned about the way you found the information, maybe that's a little warning light telling you that it's probably not the one you want to bring up. But I do think it's reasonable that, especially if, or if this person is well known, or they have bios written of them on their company, and it's very clear that they have 3 dogs, and well, that's kind of, I wouldn't bring that up. I was just trying to think of an example that somebody would have. Sometimes people in their company bios, they try to, be very personable and talk about not just their work. So yeah, I think LinkedIn's fine. Yeah.
So slight follow-up. So something else I struggle with is in an interview, for example, someone says, yeah, I'm really into classics, and I maybe have had some background there that I want to mention. Do I, just depending on like the ebb and flow, like I would never really want to like interrupt them, but if they're kind of moving on to something else and I feel like I won't be able to get back there, but I kind of want them to know, I don't know, to get personable, how do I do that?
It's so hard because there is an ebb and a flow, and you're talking about 2 individual human beings talking to each other, and there's not like a script, right? I mean, you could possibly say they've moved on. You could say, I'd love to answer that, but if we have time later, can we go back to that topic? That could help, maybe. Or you could say, just very quickly, I also am very interested in that you just mentioned, and maybe we could talk about that another time, or, but moving on to your question. Because if it looks like they kind of have a list that they're getting through, then you're right. You don't want to be like, oh, we're veering off on this, this tangent over here, and then we're veering off on that tangent, and then they're like, oh, no, I'm not going to be getting through all my questions with this person. Yes.
I was just curious, are there any further slides about negotiation and when we
Oh,
have
yes,
access to
okay.
them?
Yep, we're gonna keep moving to that. Okay, negotiation. So, I'm sorry, you had a question. Do you want to?
About interviewing, I don't know.
We have, well, let me do, can you write it down so you definitely don't forget? We have a couple more minutes, and then I'll stay after till everybody's questions are answered. Okay, so same thing goes here as in the beginning, right? You're not only researching the company, but you have to research the role and the place and the salaries. Like, do they list their salaries on the website? Can you look at salary.com and pay scale? And can you talk to alums in the field and say, what's a reasonable entry-level range for this role? Those are all ways to find out about the salary. And you might find like, oh, trends are really going up because, for example, we need a lot of nurses right now, and there's not many nurses, and so nurses are getting paid more. So that research is really important before you are negotiating a salary. You also have to be able to say, and you have to be able to say this out loud, based on my skills and experience, I would hope that I would be at the higher end of that range. So you have to elaborate, like based on my experience working for a startup and my skills in coding, I would hope that I would be at the higher end of that range. And that's a pretty hard sentence because it sounds a little bit like you're, tooting your own horn, and most people will find that kind of uncomfortable. So that's a good one to practice out loud. And remember that as seniors, if you're applying to a place that is hiring 30 people in an analyst class, they're probably paying all 30 people the same thing. And unless you have something that is truly different, like you speak 5 languages and everyone else speaks 2, or 6 coding languages and everyone else doesn't, then probably they're not going to negotiate with you. So don't stress out about it. Your time will come in your next job. But, I think you have to, but if they're just hiring you as one person, there might be more leeway there. And then also remember that other things, if they can't move on salary, they might be able to help with moving costs or commuting costs or tuition reimbursement. They might be more flexible on work from home days or hours that you're working, if you're a night owl or an early bird. So we have a lot of information about this on our website, and we're always willing and happy to talk to you all about it too. So the important thing is to have a target range that you think is reasonable for this role in whatever city you're looking in. Obviously, probably gonna be paid more if it's in New York City versus Kansas, okay? So, and then have a couple of sentences about what you think you bring, that you have practiced so that it's not foreign to your mouth when you say it. And have your walk away number, like if they go below this, I can't, make it on that. Like you've done your budget, you know what it is, and you can't say I need a higher salary because my rent is higher, because that's not really their issue. You have to say I would like a higher salary because I think I deserve it, I've earned it, or I bring that much to your company. But you do need to do your budget, separately so that you know what you can live on. Yes?
I've heard from some people that instead of you giving them a salary range, you should ask them what their hiring range is.
Totally, yes. And I think the way I said that made it come out that way, so thank you. I didn't mean that. You really want to postpone the conversation about salary as long as possible. And if they say, what are your salary requirements at the beginning, say, and you've done a little bit of research, so you would hope that you kind of have an idea of the range. You'd say, I'd love to postpone that conversation and let us talk a little bit more about the roles, the responsibilities of this role first. They may not go for that, but that's one, you can try it once. And sometimes you can ask, what is the salary range for this role? Because usually they have one. And so you don't want to be the first one to give a number, because if you get a number that's way lower, maybe they'll lower theirs, and you don't want to do that. So you want to, hear what theirs are first, hear what their range is first. And this is, this takes some practice, and it's hard because it's not something that you get to real life practice all that often. It could be like once every 2 years or something. But so, as you're thinking, again, with this whole thing here today, I want you to have it in the back of your head. Maybe you have a really interesting experience with one of your clubs and you say, you know what, I really did learn something valuable here. That might be something that I could even bring up in a salary negotiation, because those are skills that I would like to take to my next job. So I think that is the very end, except to invite you to come to see any of us. But if anyone has more questions about negotiation or interviewing or anything,